Dr. Lyra Henson sat hunched over her work desk in the dimly lit command center aboard the U.S. Horizon, the flagship of the United Earth Fleet. The hum of the ship's engines was almost drowned out by the buzzing of her terminal as it processed the latest decrypted data. Lyra, an exoarchaeologist by training, was no stranger to puzzles, but this one was different. The encrypted transmissions had come from a planet in the far reaches of known space, an uninhabitable, forgotten world that had long been thought of as a dead rock, abandoned by time and life. Her fingers moved with precision over the keys, her eyes flicking over the streams of alien characters that blinked across her screen. After months of digging through seemingly meaningless signals, Lyra had finally cracked the code, revealing a message that she could barely believe. The transmission wasn't just a distress call, but a cry for help directed at humanity. She leaned forward, her brow furrowing. This wasn't just some random signal. The language was unmistakably advanced, not just an alien race reaching out to whoever would listen. No, this was something far more specific, and its target was humanity itself. As Lyra decoded further, a strange sense of awe gripped her. The message described an ancient species, long vanished from galactic history, that had been monitoring Earth's progress. This species had watched as humanity evolved, thriving in the very same chaos that had once undone so many other civilizations. Her pulse quickened. It was one thing to discover that aliens existed, but to learn that they had been watching humanity all along? That was something else entirely. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. But the most unbelievable part of the message was yet to come. The transmission spoke of something more than just a cry for help. It suggested that humanity was destined for something greater, something the galaxy had never seen before. The message revealed that the species in question, the Kelthari, had anticipated the rise of humanity. More specifically, they anticipated the unique strength humanity had, its ability to survive. The message referred to Earth's inhabitants as Deathworlders, a term used by the Kelthari to describe a species that not only endured against overwhelming odds, but thrived under conditions that would annihilate others. Humanity was not like the other species they had encountered, who succumbed to their environments or evolved in a predictable manner. No, humans were different. Earth's unpredictable nature, its storms, predators, and disasters had shaped them into a breed of survivor, something that could stand against any force, no matter how deadly. Lyra paused, disbelief settling in her chest. Deathworlders? She had heard the term before, but it had always been whispered as a myth, a legend, or an exaggerated claim. To hear it from an ancient alien species who had lived and died in the far reaches of the galaxy was a concept beyond anything she could have imagined. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The Kelthari had also sent a warning, something far more terrifying than any hostile fleet or weaponized alien. The message described an ancient, lurking entity, an intelligence that existed beyond the physical realm. This force was capable of erasing entire star systems with a mere thought, a predatory presence that had brought even the mightiest civilizations to their knees. The Kelthari had fought this entity for eons, but now, in their final moments, they were reaching out to humanity in their desperation, hoping that the Deathworlders might be their last hope. But why? Why would the Kelthari trust humanity, a species that had only recently begun to venture into the stars, with such a monumental responsibility? Was it the strength of their will to survive? Or was it something else, something deeper, that even Lyra, in all her expertise, couldn't yet understand? As Lyra continued to read, her mind raced. There were so many questions, too many for her to answer alone. The Kelthari had begged humanity to help them fight the force that had nearly wiped them out, but the question remained, should humanity even get involved? Could they handle such a cosmic threat? The potential to tip the balance of the galaxy seemed both exciting and terrifying. The message ended abruptly with a chilling sentence, "We leave the fate of all in your hands. We trust you, Deathworlders. The universe has no room for weakness." Lyra stared at the screen, the weight of the words pressing down on her. "We trust you." It was hard to comprehend. Could humanity really be ready for such a responsibility? What did the Kelthari see in them? What did they know about humans that Lyra herself was still struggling to understand? The dilemma she now faced was enormous. The United Earth Fleet would undoubtedly want to respond, but how could she, a single scientist, weigh the consequences of such an action? On one hand, it was an opportunity to elevate humanity, to push forward into uncharted space and confront a threat that could end all of civilization. On the other hand, there was a real chance that humanity's interference could provoke a war of unimaginable scale, or worse, cause an extinction-level event. Lyra turned away from her terminal, pacing the small room. She needed to think, to process what this message truly meant. The Kelthari had placed their faith in humanity Deathworlders, and in doing so, had placed the future of the galaxy in their hands. But what was the cost of that trust? Could humanity rise to the occasion, or would they fall into the same traps that had doomed so many others? Her mission had just become far more complicated, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face what lay ahead. The only thing she knew for certain was that the universe was waiting for an answer. Lyra Henson stood in the briefing room aboard the U.A.E.S. Horizon, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders. The events of the past few days had unraveled quickly, and she found herself caught in a storm of conflicting agendas and the crushing responsibility of the knowledge she carried. The decrypted message from the ancient Kelthari was no longer just a curious discovery, it had become a war council's battleground. Fleet Commander Devrik, a hardened military leader who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of galactic politics, was eager to act. The Kelthari have clearly indicated that humanity is their only hope. We cannot afford to hesitate. If we don't respond swiftly, we risk losing our chance to gain access to their technology. The Kelthari are on the brink of extinction, and if we don't strike first, we may lose our window entirely, Devrik argued, his voice firm and commanding. Across from him, diplomat Zyros, a calm and calculated voice of reason, shook his head, clearly unsettled by the implications of the Kelthari plea. What if this is a trap? What if the Kelthari are desperate enough to manipulate us? The entity they speak of, the one that nearly destroyed them, it's still out there. How can we trust them? This could be a game of survival for them, but what if it means the end of humanity as we know it? Lyra stood at the center of the room, caught in a tug-of-war between the two men. Devrik's optimism about the technological potential of the Kelthari was persuasive. Advanced ships, weapons, and knowledge could elevate humanity to a power far beyond what Earth's current capabilities were. But Zyros' caution resonated with her too. If they rushed in blindly, what could they be risking? Could the Kelthari truly be trusted, or was their desperation blinding them to the larger dangers? As Lyra contemplated the situation, an unexpected event shattered her fragile equilibrium. Her terminal beeped urgently. A message flashed across the screen. It was from an anonymous source. The message was short but clear. Zyros has betrayed you. He has leaked the Kelthari transmission to the rogue sympathizers. They are using your discovery for their own agenda. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had trusted Zyros, a man who had always been a voice of reason in their diplomatic efforts. Yet now, it appeared that he had secretly acted against her, against humanity's best interests. Her mind raced as she considered the possibilities. Who were these rogue sympathizers? And what did Zyros stand to gain from this? The answer came sooner than she expected. A few hours later, a classified communication from Zyros himself appeared on her terminal. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he explained his actions. Lyra, you must understand. The Kelthari are manipulating us. I've shared the information with a group of individuals who believe that humanity should remain isolated. These sympathizers fear that we are stepping into something we cannot control. They believe that we should not intervene in galactic conflicts, especially ones as dangerous as this. Zyros continued, his tone laced with a strange sense of certainty. The Kelthari are not as innocent as they seem. They've made a dangerous alliance with a galactic empire that seeks power at any cost. Humanity would be nothing more than pawns in this game given access to technology, yes, but at the cost of enslaving entire civilizations. You must stop this. Humanity must not fall into their trap. Lyra sat back, stunned. The revelation sent a shock through her. What Zyros had said made sense on a certain level. The Kelthari had described the threat of the entity that destroyed them, but they had also hinted at alliances that were far from noble. Could they be asking humanity to join in a war that would not only put the human race at risk, but also condemn innocent alien populations to subjugation? It was at that moment that Lyra realized something more disturbing, something far darker. The rogue sympathizers that Zyros had aligned himself with were not simply pacifists or isolationists. They were more than that. They were survivors of the Kelthari race. Lyra's earlier research into the Kelthari transmissions had hinted at long-forgotten divisions within their civilization. This faction, now operating as rogue sympathizers, was made up of Kelthari refugees who had escaped the Empire's purge. They had seen the destruction of their homeworld, watched as their civilization crumbled under the weight of their own mistakes. But what was their true motivation? Lyra dug deeper into their history, uncovering disturbing truths. These Kelthari survivors weren't just trying to protect humanity. They were afraid that humanity would repeat the Kelthari's mistakes, too blind to see the dangers of their own ambition. The survivors had witnessed the Kelthari's destructive behavior, how their alliances with power-hungry empires had eventually led to their downfall. The survivors believed that humanity's very nature, its warlike history, its tendency to conquer, to expand, could lead to the same self-destruction. In essence, the rogue faction of survivors was trying to prevent humanity from making the same fatal mistakes. But was their intervention the right choice? Were they justified in attempting to influence humanity's course, to prevent a rise to power that could ultimately lead to their own extinction? Or were they acting out of fear, unable to see that humanity could be different from their ancient ancestors? Lyra's emotions were torn. On one hand, she could understand the Kelthari survivors' fears. Humanity's violent history was undeniable. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the message from the Kelthari. Were they truly asking humanity to fight a battle for survival, or were they using humanity to further their own cause, manipulating them for their own survival? She could no longer simply stand on the sidelines, trying to understand the situation. The stakes were too high. Lyra felt the weight of the decision crushing her. There was no clear path forward, no easy answer. Every choice led to dangerous consequences. The Kelthari's offer of technology and protection was alluring, but at what cost? Was humanity prepared to take up the mantle of responsibility, or would they repeat the mistakes of civilizations long gone? As Lyra faced the daunting reality of her situation, she realized that the greatest question now was not about the Kelthari or the rogue sympathizers. It was whether humanity could be trusted to wield such power. Could humans, flawed, divided, and prone to conflict, handle the responsibility that was being thrust upon them? And if they failed, would they doom not only themselves but countless other species as well? Her mind raced as the weight of the universe pressed down upon her. There was no turning back now. The conflict had already begun, and humanity's fate, along with that of the galaxy, hung in the balance. Lyra Henson's hands shook as she stared at the data before her. The alien texts had revealed something far darker than she had anticipated, something that, once understood, could change the course of human history. The Kelthari had spoken of a great enemy that had destroyed them, an entity beyond comprehension. But what Lyra had uncovered over the past few days shattered everything she thought she knew. This was not a physical being. It was not an empire, a fleet, or even a god. No, the Kelthari had been wrong. The entity that had destroyed them was not a force that could be fought with weapons or technology. It was an idea, an insidious, corrupting force that seeped into the hearts and minds of civilizations, turning them against themselves. It fed on doubt, on fear, on the internal contradictions that weakened societies and broke them apart. This entity, Lyra realized, had existed long before the Kelthari, perhaps even before humanity. It wasn't a single force, but a contagion, a concept that evolved over time. It was not about physical destruction. It was about manipulation, about pushing civilizations to their limits, forcing them to crumble under the weight of their own existential contradictions. It sowed the seeds of internal collapse, paranoia, betrayal, mistrust, and from that, civilizations fell. Lyra leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The more she read, the more she understood. The Kelthari were not merely victims of this entity, they were just the latest in a long line of civilizations that had succumbed to it. The Kelthari had fought the enemy with every weapon at their disposal, but they had missed the real threat. The true enemy was never physical. It was psychological, ideological, and philosophical. Humanity had the potential to be different, the text suggested. The Kelthari had misunderstood humanity's strength. It was not just the brutal survival instincts of Deathworlders that made humanity unique. It was the way humans thought, the ability to outthink their enemies, to evolve in their understanding of the world and themselves. The greatest potential humanity held was not in its ability to conquer, but in its ability to break free from the very patterns that had destroyed every other civilization before them. But this wasn't just an academic debate. Lyra knew this truth would change everything. Humanity was being tested by the universe not through war, but through its philosophy, its ability to see beyond the ego, the instinct for domination, and into a new way of thinking. Humanity's greatest challenge was not to defeat a physical enemy, but to defeat the very nature of its own self-destructive tendencies. As Lyra sat there, digesting the full weight of this revelation, she felt a surge of dread. She'd always believed in humanity's potential. Her research, her work as an exoarchaeologist, had been driven by the hope that humanity could rise above its flaws. But this was something else. This was a cosmic test. And the price for failing would be far more devastating than any war or battle. The more Lyra thought, the more she realized how fragile humanity was. The internal contradictions that had nearly destroyed countless civilizations could just as easily unravel Earth's future. Humanity's ambition, its thirst for power, and its tendency to conquer could be its undoing. If humanity could not overcome its own darker nature, if it could not learn to adapt and evolve in its thinking, it would be doomed to the same fate as the Kelthari and all the other civilizations that had fallen before them. The decision before her was agonizing. She had two paths before her, each leading to a different future for humanity. She could expose the truth, tell the world that humanity was being tested, that the true enemy was not a force to be fought with weapons, but with philosophy and intellect. But in doing so, she risked inciting a war within the United Earth Fleet. Some factions, like Fleet Commander Devreek, would undoubtedly use this knowledge to prepare for war, to conquer the galaxy, to wield the power they had always dreamed of. Others, like Zyros, would push for a more cautious approach, hoping to avoid the conflict altogether. But the hardest part was knowing the truth that humanity itself was the deciding factor in this cosmic game. If humanity embraced its full potential, it could shift the balance of the universe. But if it failed to rise above its own self-destructive tendencies, it would fall into the same patterns as every other civilization that had ever existed. Lyra's mind spun as she thought about the stakes. She knew that by revealing the truth, she would be putting humanity on a dangerous precipice. Exposing the truth about the entity, about humanity's potential, would either lead to a new era of enlightenment or the complete collapse of everything she had worked for. The decision would irrevocably alter the course of history. The emotional toll was unbearable. Lyra had spent years of her life studying alien cultures, deciphering their languages, and uncovering their secrets. But none of that had prepared her for the moral quandary she now faced. The question was not just whether humanity could survive, it was whether humanity could evolve beyond its inherent flaws. Could it transcend the very traits that had led to the downfall of every other civilization before them? There was no guarantee that humanity would rise to the challenge. In fact, Lyra was filled with doubt. The factions within the United Earth Fleet were already divided, and revealing the truth would only deepen that division. Those who believed in war would see the entity as a tool to wield, a weapon to conquer and control. Those who sought peace would see it as a warning to stay out of the galactic conflict altogether. Lyra paced the room, her hands wringing in front of her. She could no longer stay silent. The truth was too great a burden to keep hidden. The universe had already given humanity a chance to rise above its past. The question now was whether humanity could meet that challenge or whether it would fall into the same trap as all those who had come before it. With a deep breath, Lyra made her decision. She would expose the truth. She would put the fate of humanity into the hands of its people, even if it meant risking everything she had worked for. It was the only way to see if humanity could rise to its true potential. As she sent the message out to the fleet, she knew she had made an irreversible choice. There was no going back now. Humanity would have to decide whether to embrace the challenge or succumb to the same destructive cycle that had doomed the Kelthari and countless other civilizations. Lyra's heart pounded as she sent the final transmission. The universe was watching, and humanity's true test had only just begun. Lyra Henson stood at the edge of the command deck, gazing out at the darkness beyond the window. The stars seemed distant, cold, and indifferent. In a way, they always had been, but now there was something different about them. The universe itself felt waiting, as if the future had already arrived, and all humanity had to do was decide whether to embrace it or retreat into the past. Humanity's fleet had arrived at the epicenter of the threat, the region of space where the entity's influence was most concentrated. The crew, battle-hardened and determined, stood ready to face whatever physical danger awaited them. But none of them knew, as Lyra did, that the true threat was not an external force. It wasn't a fleet, a weapon, or a monstrous alien predator. The enemy had always been within. The entity was a manifestation of humanity's darkest instincts. It was not a physical being, but a reflection of everything humanity feared: its violence, its greed, its contradictions. Lyra had spent countless hours poring over the alien texts, and it had become increasingly clear to her the Kelthari had misread the threat. It wasn't something to be fought with weapons. No, the true test of humanity was not whether it could survive, but whether it could overcome its own self-destructive nature. The force that had destroyed countless civilizations was not a monster lurking in the shadows, but the very essence of the human psyche when left unchecked. As the fleet prepared for battle, Lyra's mind raced. There was no way forward that didn't involve sacrifice. The Kelthari had failed because they fought, and in their fight, they only fed the entity. The war between factions within the human fleet, the militaristic faction pushing for conquest, the pacifists urging caution, was a microcosm of humanity's internal struggle. And Lyra realized, with a sinking heart, that humanity was on the brink of repeating the Kelthari's mistakes. But she also knew that there was a chance, just a sliver of a chance, that humanity could still evolve, transcend its violent past, and prove itself capable of something greater. Lyra turned to face the holographic projection of Fleet Commander Devrik, who stood at the helm, awaiting orders. "Commander," she said, her voice steady but resolute, "we're not going to fight. We can't fight. This isn't a battle we can win with weapons." Devrik's expression hardened. "What are you suggesting, Lyra?" "We've come this far. We have the fleet. We have the power. Let's end this once and for all." But Lyra's eyes were distant. She wasn't looking at the fleet or at the battle stations. She was looking at something much bigger. "It's not about power, Commander. It's about thought. The entity we're facing. It isn't something we can kill. It's an idea, a force that feeds on our contradictions. To defeat it, we have to change." She knew what she had to do. The experimental device she had uncovered in the alien archives, the one that could manipulate collective consciousness, was the key. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but something far more dangerous, a broadcast capable of altering the fundamental way humans think. Lyra had never shared the full scope of the device with anyone. She hadn't dared, knowing its potential consequences. But now, it was humanity's only hope. "I'm going to use the device," Lyra said quietly. "I'll broadcast a new way of thinking, one that forces every human mind to confront its contradictions, its flaws. The entity will dissipate not through force, but through the evolution of thought." Devrik stared at her, disbelief mixing with fear. "You can't be serious. This is our only chance to destroy it." Lyra's gaze remained unwavering. "Destroying it won't stop it. Changing humanity, evolving our thinking, that's the only way. If we continue down the path we're on, we'll be no different from the Kelthari or any other civilization that's ever fallen. We need to evolve." The room fell silent. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with the implications of what she was suggesting. She knew that by using the device, she would be sacrificing not just herself, but a part of humanity itself. The new way of thinking, the shift she was going to force upon the human race, would be irreversible. No one would be the same afterward. But Lyra had no choice. She had seen the consequences of inaction, the dangers of letting humanity continue down its current path. The truth was, the real battle was not against a force in the stars. It was against the darkness that resided within the hearts of every person. If humanity could not overcome its flaws, it would doom itself, just as the Kelthari had. With one last glance at the fleet, Lyra made her decision. She activated the device, the hum of the alien technology filling the room. The transmission would be broadcast across the entire human race. It was a gamble, a final attempt to shift the tide of history. As the device powered up, Lyra's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of what she was about to do, the gravity of the irreversible change she was about to bring. The entire fleet would watch, but Lyra was already gone in her mind, lost in the understanding that she had no control over what came next. The final transmission was not a victory speech, not a triumph over the entity. Instead, it was a warning. Humanity had made its first step into a greater cosmic order, but it had come at a cost. The entity might be gone, but its influence, its lessons would linger in the minds of every person who heard the broadcast. And as Lyra's voice echoed in the minds of the billions upon billions of humans, she understood the truth. The battle was never about defeating an external enemy. The real fight had always been within, a fight to evolve, to transcend, to think differently. Humanity would return to Earth, its fleet battered but intact. It had survived, but Lyra knew that something had irrevocably changed. What remained of the human spirit? Humanity had ascended, but at what cost? The question remained unanswered. The question would linger for as long as humanity existed. Are we truly masters of our destiny, or have we become something else entirely? And in the silence of space, Lyra Henson finally understood. The universe was not watching them with judgment. It was waiting for humanity to finally decide what kind of species it would become.